Hi, my name is Steve Hallfish. Today I'm going to be talking to you about color correction in After Effects. You can do color correction in After Effects with the basic color correction effects and presets that are right here under the color correction folder. But you're going to see those same filters, basically their same functionality in Synthetic Aperture's Color Finesse, which is what I'm primarily going to be using today. And to get that, I'm just going to type in SA for Synthetic Aperture and C, and you can see that Synthetic Aperture Color Finesse comes up in your effects and presets, and you can just drag this and drop it right onto your to the clip that you want to affect. Let's start out with a little bit of color theory. I know that sounds boring, but it's a really kind of an important place to start if you haven't heard any of this yet. I'm going to select one of my clips and go into the full interface, click on the full interface of Color Finesse. I already dropped this filter onto this clip. Just click on that and you will see that your After Effects screen kind of gets taken over by the Color Finesse screen. As a quick introduction, what I want to explain is a little bit about the interface so that you feel like you know where to find stuff. Here is all of the various ways that you can analyze your images. This allows you to see a waveform monitor and histograms, a vector scope, and curves in this combo thing. You can look at reference, which is if you want to save a reference file that you can compare like a before and an after, or a previous scene with a next scene. You can use the reference to do that. Luma Waves gives you a waveform monitor, which basically shows you the brightness values of the monitor that's on this side. So this is showing you basically this chart in a waveform. And to kind of read this is pretty simple. You see these black chips here, and those are indicated by this, and this along the bottom. This is black down here at the bottom at 0, and it's white up here at 100. So along the top you see 1, 2, 3, 4 chips that are completely white. That would be this chip, this chip, this chip, and this chip. This matches position-wise horizontally. So this top chip is here, and then as it gets darker and darker, you're looking at this set of chips getting darker and darker across the screen this way. And then from here, this white chip down here is this chip going darker and darker and darker down this side of the screen. And then kind of this mass of stuff in the middle is probably this gray around the outside of the chart. So that's giving you an idea of what the Luma waveform is. YC waveform looks a little messier, but this includes chroma information in the Luma information. RGB waveform is very, very important. This is probably the most important of the analysis tools that you can have. And this is basically the same as this Luma waveform, only it's showing you the red, green, and blue channels of that same thing. And they all look alike here, but if this was out of balance, for example, you can see this is the original and this is my correction. I've spread out the tonal range from 100 to 0 to make it better contrast. But the original not only has lower contrast to it, but also the red channel is slightly stronger than the green channel, which is slightly stronger than the blue channel. And this is how you can tell whether there is a color balance issue with your image. And this is unbalanced because the red is stronger than the green, is stronger than the blue in what should be a completely black and white chart. So the blacks should all be the same, which they are pretty much the same. If you look at these black levels, the level here and the level here and the level here are all pretty similar. Blue might be a little lower if you look at the kind of the thickness of this little position, but where it's really evident is in the top part of the image. There's definitely a little bit more warmth, and the combination of blue or red and green is actually yellow, and blue is the opposite of yellow. So this image is slightly yellow compared to a corrected image, which is like that. So slightly yellow and then corrected. So that's one of the ways that you can see the problems with an image, is to look at the RGB waveform and note the relative values of the red, green, and blue channels in this waveform. You can get similar information by looking at the eyedropper information by clicking on, for example, white, and you can see that red is at 212, green is at 206, and blue is at 200, which is telling you pretty much the same thing here. Just a slight difference between red, green, and blue, with red being the highest and green in the middle. So that's what that's telling you. You can also click on the black, and it'll tell you that blacks are very close, 31, 32, and 29. Even though they aren't identical, that's pretty darn close. That's pretty close. You could resample it to see whether you get a closer 28, 31, and 30. That's very close. So in other words, the blacks are balanced, but the whites are not. And so what I was able to do to fix that is to slightly pull up my green channel. See how I can pull this up and down by dragging this curve up, and I'm just trying to make it the same as the blue channel. Notice that this is kind of clipped right there, and same thing with the blue. I can just drag that up, and so that is similar, and now I've got a balanced image. All three of these are equal. A GBR waveform is just the same thing, only green is first, blue is next, and red is the last. This is a little confusing to use because the curves are the opposite of that. But certainly you can use that. YRGB is similar to the RGB Parade waveform monitor, but it includes a luma. This is Y stands for luma, so this is your luminance or brightness values, then the red, green, and blue channels after that. YCBCR is very difficult to understand for novices. We're going to leave that alone for now. Overlay waveform, this is showing you the red, green, blue, and I believe luminance all laid on top of each other. A vector scope is a very interesting display. This shows you basically the saturation and the balance of any given image. Right now we're looking at a black, white, and gray image, and the trace of this image is all just a single little dot right in the middle, and that is correct because it's telling me that there's no chroma, basically. If there was some chroma in this, and I can actually make this by grabbing the blue channel here and dragging it over towards blue, you can see as I make this image more blue, the trace over here is extending further from the middle out towards the edges, and it's going towards the blue vector. And if I bring that back by simply, I can just delete that actually, delete that point. Notice that my trace goes right back to the middle as I end up with a balanced image. I could do that with any of these other images. If I wanted this to go to yellow, for example, I could take the red curve and notice how this extends up towards red, and I could take the green curve together and notice that as I match red and green together, I've actually pulled it towards yellow. So that's basically how the vector scope works. Is it's telling you how saturated a color is and where the saturation goes. Does it go towards red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, or magenta? There's also a good deal of color theory in here if you want to learn it, and that's basically the combination of any given colors. The position of them in the vector scope tells you something about the color. For example, red and green added together give you yellow. So any color that's in between another set of colors, that's what that color gives you. The combination of red and blue gives you magenta, and the combination of blue and green gives you cyan. The opposite of cyan is red, the opposite of magenta is green, and the opposite of yellow is blue. So this is a great little device to let you remember some of the color theory that's important. Histograms, some people love histograms. They definitely give you some good information. It allows you to see that the image is balanced. You can see that each one of these little things line up with the other, the red, green, and blue little mountains here line up with each other, which tells you the image is balanced. If I were to take the image out of balance, you can see now that these things are no longer lined up. So that's a way for you to tell whether an image is balanced or not. But it's not a very accurate way, and it's a little complicated. The other thing that histograms are good for is if there's a big spike at one end or the other, it's telling you that you're having some clipping. So this tells me that on the high end, possibly I have a little bit of clipping in this this and this chip probably. But that's histograms. Tone curve is basically showing you what these curves are doing down here. Not really great. And gallery allows you to look at some other images if you want to compare them to something. This is showing you the result. This tab up here shows you the result, which you always want to have it on this tab while you're color correcting, or else you can't see what you're doing. For example, if I go to source and I move this way up in the air, it doesn't look like anything's happened, but if I go back to result, you can see that I have done something. So you always want to be in result, and then if you want to check where you were to what you've done, you can just click back and forth between source and result. There's also a reference, which allows you to bring in some other reference frame, maybe a previous scene to compare things to. A split source, which is very useful. This allows you to can actually move these little lines back and forth so you can see this is the before and this is the after, and you can kind of get a sense of what your correction did. It's very useful to see. Split reference allows you to split what you have with a previous scene, so this is very useful in scene matching to make sure that one scene matches another. You can actually see them side by side. And luma ranges, this is basically telling you what color Finesse considers a shadow, and the shadows are black, a midtone, and the midtones are all indicated by pure gray, or a highlight, and the highlights are indicated by white. So basically luma ranges is just telling you, like, as if you're starting to move when you start doing some of the corrections that involve just the shadows, just the midtones, or just the highlights. This allows you to see specifically what those definitions are. Okay, this is a highlight, this is a midtone, and that's a shadow. And if we go back to result, you can kind of see the natural view. Let's take a look at some of the tools that we have here. HSL, this is the basic one that everyone uses. I would stay away from contrast, contrast center, brightness, vibrance, and hue. Those are not very accurate specific ways to do color corrections. Saturation is good, especially towards the end of a correction. A lot of the things that you do as you start to do a correction will influence saturation, so you don't necessarily want to start with adding saturation or taking away saturation. You want to wait to see where your correction goes, and then when you're kind of done, look at your image and go, you know what, it's too saturated, it's not saturated enough, and then do saturation at that point. RGB gain, gamma, and pedestal are here to be able to change basically the brightness, the midtones, and the pedestal is the blacks. So this is black, midtone, and highlight basically, and if I adjust these, you'll be able to see. So there's pedestal. You can see that pedestal brings the blacks down. The gain brings the gain up and down. The highest, brightest parts bring those up and down. And gamma basically adjusts midtones. So that's basically that. I'm going to reset that. You can also adjust inside, that's the master adjustment. You can also adjust your highlights, midtones, and shadows only. So if you want to affect the saturation of just your highlights, go to this tab, enable it, and just bring down the saturation of your highlights, or your midtones or your shadows. The other important tool in this HSL control is your hue offsets. This is probably very familiar to those of you who edit on Final Cut or have seen Final Cut or used Final Cut. This is kind of like the three-way color corrector here in Final Cut Pro with the addition of another wheel, which is the master wheel, to change overall values. I would definitely suggest just adjusting shadows, midtones, and highlights. Unless you're doing something drastic, kind of a graphic look, I'd stay away from master. So you can just kind of move these things. For example, if you want the image to, in the shadows, to be warmer, you just click on the black dot in the middle and pull it up towards red, and notice that the whites are still staying pretty white, but the blacks have quite a bit of red in them now. And just the intensity of that red depends on how far out you pull this towards the outside edge. If you wanted your blacks to have a lot of blue in them, you could pull this out towards the blue edge or green or any of the other colors. You can kind of just drag these things and you'll get your image balanced or unbalanced in a way that you would like. Midtones, same thing here. You know, you pull your midtones and now all the middle stuff is much more red, and we could do the same thing with highlights. If you want your highlights to be red, you can just drag that up like that and you can see that the highlights are getting much more red. So that's basically how those work. I'll reset that. RGB, this is basically a way to be able to, remember when we have the RGB waveform monitor, this allows us to almost directly manipulate this image on the screen by, if I turn this on, you'll see what I can do. For example, red gain, if I grab the red gain, you can see that only the red channel, the gain of the red channel goes up and down. So if I'm trying to balance these images, this is a very simple way for me to grab part of this waveform monitor and make these images balanced. As we explained, the shapes here have to be equal between red, green, and blue to make something be gray or balanced. So this allows me to kind of actually reach in and go, oh, the red pedestal. So if I want to affect the bottom portion of just the red channel, I can grab red pedestal and just move this up and down. So that's how that works. And you have a control over red, green, and blue, gamma, pedestal, and gain. CMY, I would leave this alone. CBCR, I would leave this alone too. Curves is great because basically it allows you to do the same thing I was just doing in RGB, only to do it kind of graphically. So I can grab a portion of this graph and it does the same thing. I can either raise my black levels, basically in these curves, black is at the bottom and white is at the top, and you have control over your luminance or brightness or master, then red, green, and blue. So if I want to affect just one of these, for example, if I wanted to bring the green blacks down a little bit, I can just reach down here to the black portion of the green channel and pull this up and down very, very intuitively. You can do the same thing with the highlights. And if I wanted to do it with the midtones, I could just kind of click in the middle of this and you can see how I'm moving the midtones up and down. This middle section I'm actually able to directly manipulate by dragging this up and down. Levels. This allows you to manipulate the image using histograms by moving these little arrows in and out to kind of increase contrast, for example. And you can also adjust where your midtones lie, either brighter or darker, by controlling these little triangles on the bottom of the histograms. I'm going to undo that. Luma ranges affects the definition of what a shadow, midtone, and highlight is. If you remember, there's a Luma ranges tab up here. If we click on this, you can actually affect what the computer considers a highlight by moving this. See, now a larger amount of things are considered highlights and less is considered midtone. So you could move this, for example, if you wanted a highlight to be able to be affecting more than it was before. Same thing with shadows. If I want to have more of the image be defined as a shadow, I can drag these one way or the other. I can also go the opposite way, so almost nothing is defined as a shadow. So this is just a way to kind of affect what is defined in the computer as a highlight, midtone, or shadow. Secondaries is very important. Secondaries allows you to select a specific color. Better go to result here. I can select a color and manipulate just that color. To be able to see what I've selected, you can choose alpha, and now you can see I've selected just this. So if I start manipulating the brightness or shadow or saturation or hue of this, I can see what I'll be affecting is just these highlight clips. So when I go to result and I turn off show preview, now as I move, let's say we pump a bunch of red into those, I'm only affecting those couple of chips that were indicated by my alpha preview. So that's how secondaries works. You can also use these to change the hue or saturation of any of those things. So if we turn this off, you can also change the hue by dragging this one way or another, or the saturation, making it more and less saturated, bring down the gain, for example, if you wanted to, of just those couple of chips, and the gamma and pedestal. So that's how secondary color corrections work. And limiting is basically just to make sure that what you are exporting is going to be legal for broadcast, and you have plenty of options here to turn them on or off. If you don't want to turn on any of these things, you can just unclick these buttons, and I think most of my correction in this specific effect was done in curves. So that's a little bit about color correction. The things to remember are that to balance something out, you need the RGB waveforms to be even. Notice that the tops of these, red, green, and blue, are all even along the top. That means the whites are balanced. Having them even across the middle, which they aren't quite right now, means that the gammas are balanced, and having them match along the bottom means the shadows are balanced. Another way to look at that, as I explained, was by doing a simple sample with the eyedropper and then looking at the sample. So you can see that my reds are at 126, my greens are at 121, and my blues are at 125. So what this is telling me is that this image, this gray image, is a little bit on the magenta side because it lacks green, and the opposite of green is magenta. So if I wanted to get some of the magenta out of this green, I would need to add a little bit of, I'm going to go to my green here and just add a little bit of green in my midtones. And now when I sample them, I'm at 133, 126, 128. They don't have to be exact, but that gets them closer. These are much closer than they were, and you could even, play around with it more to see whether you could get it even closer. So basically those are the big parts of color theory that you need to understand. The vector scope, that balanced things are in the middle, and the brighter high chrominance things are towards the outside, and where they lay in reference to these vectors, red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, and yellow, tells you what color cast the certain parts of the image have. Skin tones, by the way, are exactly along this line. Whether you're white, black, Asian, Native American, Indian, whatever you are, your skin tones are going to lie right along this line pretty much no matter who you are. Asians lean a little bit towards the yellow, but not much. They're basically, almost everybody is right in here for a skin tone. So that's it for the color correction theory, and also for the basic explanation of how to use color finesse inside of After Effects. In our next color correction tutorial, we'll actually do hands-on examples using a variety of different video images from feature films and also from video.